So I'm always going to look at it because there's new ways of thinking, there's new technologies, there's new information that comes, and we want to be able to adjust and iterate on that. My name is Matt Reiner, managing partner at Capital Investment Advisor, CEO of Wellness Strategies, an author, podcast host, and also a speaker to the wealth management community. My mission is to help every family in this country have access and be served by a human financial advisor. That we all have to live in the moment and not try to force progress too quickly. Let it happen and commit to a long-term strategy in your life, in your business, and in your investment portfolio.
And now, your host and my dad, Matt Reiner.
Garrett Cottle, Columbus, Georgia, Momentum Wealth Management. How are you, my friend?
I'm good. How are you?
I can't complain, man. It's a good day. It is a good day, and I'm excited, man, for this conversation. I loved kind of chatting here before we started on the air. Everything, we're going to talk everything from growth, personal and professional, and business growth, to processes, something that I'm super intrigued about, and then potentially get to innovation, which is another something I'm intrigued about, as I do a lot with AI and a lot of content there. But before we dive into it, Garrett, I just love to learn more about the human side of things, and I'm curious, I always like to ask the question to the guests is, what did the 13-year-old Garrett Cottle want to be when he grew up?
That's a good question. I was big into music, and so I wanted to do something in music, and that's actually my degree is in recording technologies. So I don't even have I don't even have a degree in finance, which I find is sort of common among the advisors that I meet. That's probably what I would have said. 13-year-old Garrett would say, I'm in a band somewhere. And yeah.
In a band. I love that. All right. And I see you got the Beatles behind you in your office.
We got the Beatles,
so,
yeah, absolutely.
That makes
always got to have the Beatles.
It makes a ton of sense. So now you have to help us understand how you went from wanting to be in a band and getting a degree in music or music production to now running and co-founding a wealth management firm. Tell us that journey.
Well, it was born out of necessity, really, where I was living at the time in the Northeast Louisiana section of the country. There wasn't a whole lot by way of production availability. So I got into banking as sort of a way in to go from newly graduated to almost about to be married. So we just had to find, it was a pivot. And so I went into the banking industry, started there at the very bottom. And so one of the things that kind of caught my eye was the bank that I worked for had financial advisors. And so, you could kind of see them coming in and out, and they sort of were, this is not at all figuring out what the job is and talking to these guys that work in the banks. This is not what it is. But on the outside looking in, it's these guys show up at the branch, they kind of do their own thing, they meet with a couple of clients, they leave. A lot more in the background that you don't see happening. But so I was like intrigued. It's like, oh, that's pretty cool. So I would go and talk to these guys, and when there was an opening, I would go and kind of interview with them. But quickly found out that in bank environments especially, they're not looking to hire from within and train somebody and license somebody. They want somebody to come from outside. They want somebody to bring their book of business, which makes sense. It's a business decision. And so I had to find another angle to it. And so we did that. So I had a buddy of mine that also worked at a local bank. We grew up together here in Columbus, actually. And we, through different means, figured out a way to kind of start with a small broker dealer that was here in Georgia. And we started with mutual fund sales and sort of getting in the car and driving from, 5 a.m. one morning to like midnight or 1 a.m. the next morning. We would just drive all through Arkansas and Texas and Mississippi, and we had a lead system that we were a part of. And we were meeting in people's homes, and, account processes were not electronic at that time. So we'd have a giant briefcase with a little mobile printer and like a a 300 ream sheet of paper, and we would be there for hours opening these accounts at the broker dealers and at the mutual fund companies. And one thing led to another, and we had some, we changed broker dealers a couple times. And then in 2018, we decided to go the RIA route, and wonderful decision. Would never look back from that. But that's sort of the story in a nutshell of how I ended up here.
Speaking of looking at the past and then also kind of aligning with what we are here at the FutureProof Advisor podcast, I always am curious to ask advisors, I have this vision of what a FutureProof Advisor is, and that's what a lot of the content that we create is around. But I always like to understand and ask, what does being a FutureProof Advisor mean to you, to Garrett Cottle? What does that mean when you think about your business, the industry, whatever it may be, what a FutureProof Advisor means?
That's a question we ask ourselves a lot, and it's I would say the overarching goal and what we keep coming back to is relationship based. And so it doesn't matter all the particulars. You can fight about operations and processes and what to add and what to pivot to, but it's just about relationship. We constantly do things for our clients all during the year. And so that can be annual reviews, that can be, checking on the income, are we contributing enough, all this kind of stuff. The thing that we get the most feedback about at the end of the year, whole year through, the thing we hear the most about is we send people boxes of pecans for Christmas. And that just blows people's mind. I mean, they go on and on and on about it. I had a vendor contact us and say, hey, I know you guys do big things at Christmas time. We want to pitch you an idea about, we've got this other thing we could send. And I was like, no, I can't do that. I can't touch that. There'd be a mutiny if we stopped sending these things out. So it's all for us about how we create that relationship. And that leads into other conversations about what we add to the practice. We have do we eventually get to where we add sort of like a family office type practice where we have CPAs on staff and we have estate planning attorneys? Do we look at that? Is that something that we need to kind of be focused on, kind of skating toward? But it's at the end of the day, it's all about providing that relationship and the value to the client.
I think that's such a poignant point, and I love the pecan story too, because that's we for referrals sent bread. Like there's this great pumpkin bread. They made all these different types of breads, and we would send bread, and everybody thought that was the best thing since sliced bread, that they got a loaf of bread from us, and it was delicious. And it is those simple things, right? I think that is a really great point about we do all this financial stuff, and that is just the expectation. The relationship is built on those things that go above and beyond the expectation, and it doesn't have to be an expensive above and beyond. It can be very minimal. It's just it needs to be thoughtful, which is what goes into relationships. I want to dive into that a little bit as well, but I want to start by thinking about when we talk about a future-proof advisor. To be able to have that thoughtfulness of relationships and being able to be thoughtful about how to go above and beyond, there is this element of personal growth that has to be there. And I think that you have to have a mindset and everything of that nature. I'm curious though, on your personal growth side, because I know that you do a lot of reading, listening to podcasts, etc. What have you found to be the most impactful way for you to grow personally? And maybe we can just take it from the time you started this business, because starting a business is really challenging and not a lot of people go there, and you learn a lot along that way and along that journey. So what has been kind of that biggest, most impactful way that you've been able to grow, or for you to grow personally, that you've seen?
I think it's being intentional with it and specifically setting aside times to do certain things. We try to be very purposeful about that. We have sort of sections of the year internally as a firm, but also, as individuals. Matt is the co-founder that I run the firm with. And we look at it from the standpoint that we've been doing this for 13 years. So we kind of know, if we're not intentional about certain things, they're not going to get done. And so he and I have different strengths. And so his answer to this question would probably be different than mine. But I sort of have learned over the years, and as I get older, I guess this is what happens to you as you get older, but you kind of lean more into who you are. You kind of change throughout your life, and then you kind of figure out what your strengths are and what your lane is, and you kind of lean into that. And I find myself doing that the older I get, but it always has to be done with intention. So it's just being intentional about time and, prioritizing what will make you grow. And sometimes, it could be because of how things work now, which was even different than 13 years ago. You can pull up a Twitter feed or something like that, and my Twitter feed is probably boring to the average person, but I've got a lot of analysts, a lot of people, having these conversations about what the market's doing and all this kind of stuff. So it's interesting to me, and I may take 5 or 10 minutes to scroll through that, and that's like, obviously it's scrolling and whatever that does to my brain, but it's also kind of educational is how I like to look at it. I'm learning new things. I'm looking at what other people are talking about, and I'm kind of weighing it against my own biases or my own thoughts just to see we never want to be in a vacuum when we're doing this, because I don't think that's beneficial. I think you always have to have, a network of people that you kind of judge your thoughts against, particularly in this industry. Because you don't want to be, there's something to be said about going against the grain, but, how much can you go against the grain, I guess?
Like when you think about the intention around like growing in curiosity and like this idea around going against the grain or not going against the grain, like what is your desired outcome of that curiosity and that growth, right? What is your desired end state from that standpoint? If you're going to go and get others' opinions, what is your desire to use with those opinions? Is it to solidify and validate your opinions? Is it to, think about things differently? And do you think that there is an opportunity or do you think that is a challenge in our industry, that we all are just going with the herd because we don't want to go against the grain? Is that one of the reasons why maybe we are slow to adopt or evolve necessarily, and we have stayed the same for so long? I'm curious on that side too.
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, it's kind of all the above. We have, to get into the more technical aspect of it, we have data that we're constantly looking at. We pay for market data and indicator data and things like that because we run our own models here. We don't use third-party managers. And so we're constantly looking at how to make that better and how to make that experience better. We get data from our providers every night. And so if I pull that up and I look at it, I want to also pull up these other analysts or advisors or people that run an RA or guys like you that are much larger than I am, but are somewhere that I want, I aspire to be. I want to get there. I'm going to see what you guys are thinking. I'm going to see what the conversations you're having are. And if they match what I'm seeing, then I feel better about that. But if I have a data point come in and it says that, let's just take an example, totally hypothetical. Let's say that Russell 2000 is poised to take off tremendously. And that's what I'm seeing in my data. And then I pull up, a couple of other people and I look at them saying, I would never touch the Russell 2000 or the Russell 2000 is this, or look at this trend line or whatever. That's for me going to be enough for me to take a pause and say, is this correct? And should I be looking at this a different way? For the most part, it's extremely valuable because when I pull up, I have a list of people that I follow pretty religiously on social media and any newsletters or anything they put out. And so a lot of times, especially over the past, I would say 4 or 5 years, what they're saying is just smack dab in line with what we're seeing. And it's really encouraging because we are a $60 million firm-ish, depending on the market. So we're smaller in the grand scheme of things, but we aspire to be larger. I think we're certainly a growth-focused RIA. And so if we're looking at guys that are much bigger than us and they're looking at sort of the same things, that's encouraging to me.
What has been the biggest driver of y'all's growth so far? I mean, you're at 60 million now. I know you have aspirations to be, closer to 150 million in the next 5 years, and then well beyond that. What has been your biggest driver of growth so far? How have you been able to drum up that kind of ability to get to 60 million so far?
I think it changes based on your AUM structure, and maybe you can attest to this as well. I think that if you're looking at it from goal lines, basically, I think different goal lines. Let's say you have a goal of 50 million AUM. 50 million is, in our experience, was very hard to get to. I mean, it was like you'd get there and then you'd have a pullback or something, and you'd get there and you'd have so we broke through 50. And I think the next kind of thing we're looking at is the 75 to 80, and that seems to be kind of difficult to get to as well. I think that for us, it's a combination. We are lucky enough to be in a position to where we can be sort of flexible. And so we can say yes to a lot of things that are either lead generation tools. We can kind of use those for a few months or whatever and determine if it's a good fit. And then we're also moving really heavily into what we've been doing the past few months is trying to move heavily into the local market here in Columbus. And so we have a couple of competitors here in Columbus, and I use that term loosely because I don't buy into this idea that advisors are competitive. I think that I would be open to sitting down with advisors and talking about how they work, because they could have ideas that we would benefit from, and we could have ideas that they would benefit from. So I don't really buy into this whole notion that, there's this giant competition. But we have a few RIAs that are certainly larger than we are here in Columbus. It's a fairly large area. And so we are making a huge push from a marketing standpoint. We're pushing out brand awareness campaigns. We just had a 2-minute video. I don't know if I sent that over to you. We just had a 2-minute video done that we're going to turn into a commercial. I'm doing a podcast with business owners where we talk about exactly how you structure business, how you run a business, all these kind of questions, because we get that a lot from clients that we work with. And so we're just trying to do things that will ingratiate us into the public's view with the goal of being, in the next 5 years or so, when you think of financial advice or you think of wealth management or you think of retirement, we're one of the top 3 names you think of in this area.
You said one of the things about being nimble, and now you're in terms of being able to do more for different people. And I think that is like the ability of like being small and not having to have structure so far and everything of that nature. You can say yes to more things because you're kind of in control. And so the first 50 million, it seems that it was kind of like a hand-to-hand combat to get to that 50 million, right? And now you're trying to get to that next benchmark of 75 million, and you're using a little bit of like SEO and advertising and podcast content. So it's like a content strategy, digital media strategy for growth. I believe I saw on your website that you guys have a focus on, I think Aflac is big in Columbus. Do you have a focus on attracting, going after that specific, understanding the Aflac business really well to help the employees and the team members there? Is that a strategy?
Yeah, that was a strategy. So Aflac did a series of buyouts for their pension. So older employees that maybe were closer to retirement. This is not exclusionary to Aflac at all. There are a lot of companies doing this where they don't necessarily want to hold the pension on their balance sheet, so they want to get rid of that. Certainly, we have a lot of Aflac employees as clients, and so we did use that to our advantage to kind of go in and get the SEO working in the right way, building out a page specifically for it. And we got a lot of calls from Aflac people that when they Google searched Aflac pension, we were the #1 hit. We would get calls from people who thought we were the pension management group. And we were like, well, you got to call these people and then call us back and tell us, what they tell you. So that is a very good example of us being able to be nimble. We have the ability to go in and do that and create these sort of niches to target certain groups of people. Niching is really big within the industry. I don't know. I don't have a fully formed opinion on it. I think that it's a hard thing to do. I just think it's a hard thing to do. The niching, like I'm an advisor only to doctors, or I'm an advisor only to, hockey players, or whatever it is. I think it's a difficult kind of place to put yourself in. And I just question how much good it can do over the long haul.
What, from your standpoint, right, at 60 million, what makes it difficult for you to say, hey, I'm going to go just be focused on doctors, or I'm only going to be focused on Aflac employees, or whatever it may be?
For me, I like the idea of having to figure out different challenges. And so you have a different client population. You have people that are, maybe in different industries, and, you're having a goal of kind of getting them from where they are now to where they want to be.
Yeah. It's an interesting, I think that's an interesting perspective. And I don't know what's right or wrong, to be honest. I have no idea. I think, and I don't think any of us do, and all of us are just making hypotheses. I think there is this value I see on the one side of being deeply knowledgeable about one thing and having this singular level of focus that allows you to see things and exploit things in a different way. The challenge that I think many people have is that it's very limiting when you're trying to grow early on. So niching may be easier for larger firms. And it's a matter of like, when you put all of your dedicated time, what we have seen, at least on our side, is that when we found people that are giving dedicated time to an initiative, we do a lot better at it than we're doing when we have people focused on 3 different initiatives. To your point, it's like, well, I like to be creative. I want to be able to help multiple people. And it's a really interesting conversation. I don't think it's a debate. I think it's a conversation. And I don't know if it works for everybody on that side, because I guess then the question I get to you is like, when you look at growth of your firm, of adding new clients to your firm, what has been the biggest challenge? What's the biggest hurdle? What is the struggle you go through of adding more clients?
The biggest thing is trying to figure out how to have the conversation with people about what a financial advisor is. I mean, that sounds super easy and super dumb, really. But at the end of the day, that's what all of our energy and time is spent doing. And so we will, certainly it's a bit easier now with some of the AI tools that are available, where you can go in and sort of generate a lot of ideas that would have taken you a lot longer to do, even 5 years ago. For us, it's all about trying to figure out internally first what our value add is, and then figuring out how to tell people what our value add is. Because as financial advisors, we're in an industry that has what I would consider to be a high barrier to entry. So for us, specifically attached to the marketing side of things, and now that we're marketing more locally than we ever have before, that's what it's about. It's about finding Bob Smith and speaking directly to Bob Smith and his wife and saying, this is what we do for you guys, and this is what we can do for you guys, and you guys are here and you want to be here, and this is the process. And so, Bob Smith may be a number of different people, but it's figuring out the common denominator to say, first of all, we exist. Here's our brand. Here's everything about us, so we familiarize ourselves. And then here's what we do to help. And so I think it is, as advisors and people that run advisory firms, a lot of times we can get lost in the weeds in that.
One of the things that you talked about was like how much you do for families, along with sending them pecans as well. But all the financial things you do for families, I'm curious, what do you, when you think about delivering that, there's like so much work that goes on behind the scenes, so much process that is built out. When you think about like the firm that you all have built together with your co-founder, what do you think is the best process you all have incorporated into your business so far?
I think the best process that we've built is acknowledging the client after they become a client. So a lot of times financial advisors focus on the prospect aspect of it, and they really want to handhold through the whole prospect process. Let's do a Zoom call here. Let's do a phone call. Let's meet. Let's get coffee, whatever. Let's make the introductions. And then when they become a client, it sort of drops off. And so for us, we go back to that, we send a big basket out to all clients that join the firm, a welcome basket. We've got mugs and coffee and, little, knickknacks or whatever in there. We will send out stuff for clients' birthdays, if clients get married, all that kind of stuff. We try to, as best we can. It's hard because you don't always know, but we try to know as much as we can about kind of the phases of life, so a new home or whatever, housewarming gifts. So developing a process for that, and then developing a process for communication, which is the biggest factor. So we try as best we can to communicate. And so recently we've gotten into doing more of the video stuff. So we do a podcast on Mondays where Matt and I have always had a conversation at the beginning of the week about what we think the week coming up is going to look. We always look back at the week past and we talk about the week to come and what's going to happen. And so we just put a camera in front of us and some microphones, and we started releasing that as a podcast to clients. And then recently we kind of just started posting it to YouTube and letting anybody watch it. We have to do this content that's more video oriented or more audio podcast oriented, because that's the way people take in information. And so if you're there at the forefront of that, I think you're going to benefit from that. And it may not be in the next 30 or 60 or 90 days or maybe a year. Maybe it takes a couple of years for that to kind of play out. Maybe you establish yourself, but it's all about consistency.
I love that process. I could dive into that process even deeper, but I think that just the thoughtfulness of how do you create processes around it's about of repeatability and consistency. What do you see from what you're learning in the business from a trend standpoint, both in the business and out of the business, that makes you most excited about the future of our business?
AI makes me the most excited about the future of our business. And someone else may say that scares the pants off of them about the future of our business. But a lot of advisor-specific technology is not good. The CRMs that we have access to in the financial space, they're not good because they want to force me to run my business the way they want me to run my business. And it doesn't work that way. I want to run my business. I want to build my business out the way that I want to build it out. And I'm forced to do it sort of within this structure. So that's a whole nother conversation, I'm sure, but we don't even use a financial advisor specific CRM. We use like an open source CRM that we can connect a lot of other tools to that tracks everything. And so it shows everything. But I'm most excited because that's going to make our job a lot easier even than it is with all the automation that we've built out. It's sort of a double-edged sword because it's also kind of scary, but you can have, we're not feeding client specific information. Like I've seen a couple of your videos where you'll upload sort of client benign literature and have AI summarize it and give you all these great things about it. So we can take that from a brand perspective and we can pour everything we can into this large language model, this, to learn everything you can about momentum. This is our brand. This is our brand language. This is a podcast we did, figure out our inflections, figure out our way of speaking, and then we can have that generate just endless content that we have to sit down and do. You have to actually put pen to paper, but the ideas are endless. They're there. They're for you. I mean, it's a very low barrier to entry there because ChatGPT is like $20 a month. It's very low barrier to entry, but that's what I'm most excited about because it's going to help us solve those problems or the struggles that we have with figuring out a way to speak specifically to people where they are, which is a lot of times what an analytical person is not good at doing. It's going to enable these kind of solo firms that don't have maybe a partner as a sounding board. I think that's going to be your sounding board. AI is going to be your sounding board. You're going to go in and say, hey, this is what I'm thinking in an analytical mind. Can you translate to this to a more emotional mind? And it's going to do it. And you're going to be able to create ad content from that. You're going to be able to create emails, newsletters. You have to edit it. It's not great. You can't just copy and paste, something that ChatGPT generated and paste it into an email. It does take some time, but I think it is going to be a game changer.
I think the ability to solve problems faster and in our own way and not be reliant on other companies to solve it or bigger companies or the tech providers to solve it, I think creates this like building block of momentum that is exponential that people can't even wrap their heads around, right? How you solve a problem using AI versus how we do versus other people. And if you can create the community, which just as a plug, we are building that community right now. But if you can build a community that can ultimately share these concepts and also understand and better have a voice of shaping kind of the regulation to allow us to continue to push forward with these concepts, then you start to have this like idea share that is like you're building at exponential rates that are beyond ever being done, which I think can disrupt maybe the tech companies of the industry, because I agree with you. I think that they're very limiting and I think it's going to force them to open it up. But I agree. I think there's so much. I think that the ability to take an idea to prototype to solution is so much easier than ever. It's a very exciting time.
I think that whole LLM stuff, AI stuff is super interesting. I'm looking forward to seeing how that helps specifically smaller firms operate without having to add a whole bunch of staff.
Yeah, I mean, we could have this conversation forever. I can see the passion on innovation. We could have spent the whole 3 hours on innovation and stuff of that nature. Before I let you go, I have 2 questions I ask all my guests, and I'm just curious to hear your answers from them. What's the most common question on your clients' minds these days?
The most common question on our clients' mind is Social Security, because that's in the news. And so, it's a challenge because there's math and then there's emotion, and that's our whole job. I mean, that's summarizing a financial advisor is math versus emotion. And so that's the conversation we're having a lot.
That's great. And then finally, I love to learn through others that are smarter than me. One way I like to learn is reading. So I always ask every guest that is on, what's one book out there that you think everybody should read?
I would say I'm going to go outside the industry for this one. When it first came out, I read Bob Iger's autobiography, The Ride of a Lifetime. And I think that was a really good look into a very creative person balancing the creativity and the sort of responsibilities of an executive. And, he's since retired and then was brought back. And so it kind of also illustrates the power of how hard it is to replace that type of thinking. It's a super interesting read. Very quick, very easy, but I like that one.
I will second that one. That's also one of the reasons in our FutureProof Advisor surveys that all of our guests take. I ask, what's the best part of Disney? It was inspired from that book, and that's why I believe it's the experience. And that's what Bob was so good at, was he created an experience that was memorable. And the best leaders do that. They aren't just tactical, they create these experiences.
That's a very good way to put it, and that's what we're constantly thinking about, the experience part of that, because we have to create our own experiences too for clients.
That's your unique differentiator. That's how people can build moats. That's how advisors and wealth managers can build moats in a very similar work of what we do. So, Garrett Cottle, man, really enjoyed this conversation. I'm super excited to continue following all of what you're going to do and hopefully have more conversations. And I always ask, if there's anybody out there that wants to have a conversation with you or get in touch, what's the best way for them to get in touch with you?
You can hit us up on the website, momentumwealth.us, and there's various means of contact, text message, email, phone call. We do it all.
Awesome. Garrett Cottle, thanks so much, man. Stay well, be well, and keep on pushing forward, buddy. Appreciate it.
Thank you. I appreciate it.